Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to Core Advanced Importing. My name is Sarah Jones and I'm the Director of Marketing for Realnex. And I am pleased as punch to be able to present Bobby Babbis, who is our Senior Support Specialist and actually our importing guru. He handles all of the big importing jobs. So he is primed and ready to give you all of his knowledge, I hope. Bobby is really great about taking questions both throughout the webinar and also at the end. So if you have questions, don't hesitate to enter them into the little square box provided by GoToWebinar. And I will go ahead and figuratively turn the mic over to Bobby since we're not actually in the same office. And we'll get moving. Bobby.
Thank you much, Sarah. And honestly, even if we were in the same office, I don't know anyone that uses physical mics like that, for anything computer-based. But it's a nice thought.
Let's make it happen.
Everything's likened to something that wasn't technologically possible like 10 years ago. So yeah, it makes sense. But thank you everybody for joining us today. Today we're going to be going a little bit more in depth on importing than the basic webinar that we did a few weeks back. So we're going to delve into a few more of the advanced types of imports. We're going to talk about sale comp and space importing, being able to import the comparables as well as the properties along with the buyers and sellers, and the tenants along with the spaces that they lease and the properties that those spaces are in. So they're a little bit more complicated than a basic property import will be, but that's exactly why we're doing this. We're also going to talk a little bit about some tips and tricks for getting your data ready in Excel. Now, I mean, some of the time there's not going to be any replacement for going through and manually updating information, but there are some things you can do kind of on a global scale to make things a lot easier as well. And I'll talk about the main things that I end up coming across on a regular basis with the spreadsheets that come my way. And I also want to talk a little bit about exporting information in order to, modify the information in Excel in order to import back in later on. So that's going to be what we're going to go into, and I'll actually be starting with the export functionality. That way we have a spreadsheet to play with as well. So before doing any sort of import on your database, it's always a good idea to first make a backup. So under the File menu, there's an option for backup there. If you select that, you can just hit backup and it'll ask you where you want to save the file to. On this backup screen, I almost always will uncheck shared files if I'm doing a backup just for the purpose of having like a snapshot to go back to if my import doesn't go right. So shared files just really will increase the size of it and isn't necessary if you're just taking a snapshot. It's good for like regular weekly backups in case your hard drive crashes, but not for a small thing like this for just making sure you have a point to go back to. Then you'll get to select where you want to save it to, hit save, and it will back up your database. It just takes a few moments generally on even a relatively large database. So the amount of time end up saving if you do need to undo an import, as there's no undo button. Can't really stress that enough. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was exporting in order to import into the database. And I did talk about that a little bit as well on the webinar on database cleanup, but I want to talk about it from a little bit different perspective as well, because we're talking about kind of more advanced importing. So we're going to actually talk about exporting properties with the contacts and being sure that they link up back to the correct information. So first off, I'm going to go ahead and open up properties, and I'm wanting to export all of my properties as well as the ownership information so I can have somebody clean that information up and import it. Then once it's cleaned up in Excel, import it back in. So first off, we want to make sure when we're exporting information that we have a key to bring back in. So when you import data into the CRM, as we talked about on the basic importing webinar, and this will become apparent as well if you haven't done that yet, we'll go over the absolute basics, just not in as much depth as previously. But the keys are set to tell the database basically which fields you want to use to determine if there's duplicates. But you can create a unique identifier for each of your records directly within the CRM. And that's done using the global replace function. So first off, I'm going to go ahead and set up a key for all 199 of my properties so they all have a unique value. That way when I export the data, I can export with that key, and when I import back in, it'll know exactly which record to match up to. And I've already done this for contacts, and when you're exporting properties and contact information, you'll want to do it for both of those tables. So to add a key to your records, under the lookup menu, there's an option for global replace. When you click on that, you'll get a dialog box for global replace. The first thing we want to select is field to replace. So there's a field that's specifically designed to hold an import key, and that's called import record. And as the name implies, it's a unique record identifier for import purposes. Next up, you select the expression box here, and we'll actually talk about expressions a decent amount more during the importing process as well. So this is actually the exact same expression editor that you'll see on imports. Now, in this case, we're going to go in here to Functions. Under Miscellaneous, there's an option for New ID. If you just double-click on that, it'll put New ID and then open and close parentheses. If you hit Test, you'll see a string of letters and numbers and dashes. So once you do that, you hit OK. And then anytime I'm doing a global replace, I just always check this checkbox. It's a habit I'm in just to not update the last modified field, because usually when you're adding an import record to them, that's not a real good reason to update that. So hit OK and hit yes, and in a few seconds we will have keys on all of our records, and I'll show you exactly what that ends up looking like. So now we've got our 199 properties that we want to export to Excel. First step is hit F5 on your keyboard or select View and a property list. Either way, it's going to bring up the list view window. I'm just going to bring it up full screen here. And so the next step, once you have the list up, is to make sure you have the columns that you want to export to Excel, especially the import record column. So I'm going to drop this down and select Fields, which will bring up the Fields dialog window where we can select exactly which fields show up in this list. And ultimately, anything that's in this list when you hit the Excel button is what's also going to get exported. So I'm not going to bring that over here. I'm just going to go into the Owners and do Owner Import Record as well as Owner Import Name, or Owner Name. So I'm just going to bring in the name and import record as well as the email address. So I want them to, ultimately I'm going to have them, the research company, research the email address based on the person's name, and actually probably would want the company as well in that case. Name and company and figure out the email. This is all hypothetical, but in the same sense though, I want to also add the import record field for the property. That way we can update the fields that are in here. So we've got the property name, address, city and state, the building size, acreage, units, and import record. I like to actually take the import records and put them all the way at the top because I usually will just hide those two columns in the Excel file. That way they don't get modified. So hit OK, and now we'll see those two columns on the left side here have a bunch of strings of letters and numbers that we can use when importing data into the database. So at this point we can just hit Excel, and now as long as the column A and B aren't modified, we can modify any of the other fields in this Excel spreadsheet that it just created, property name, address, and so on, and then utilize these import record columns to key back into the database to find the correct record and update it at that point. We'll delve into that in just a second here, actually, as we'll be talking about importing, and keys are pretty much always going to be something that you want to utilize in some manner on an import, unless you really just have like a spreadsheet of just properties. So I'm just going to go ahead and close this, as I won't need that personally. So next up, I want to talk about cleaning up data in Excel prior to importing it into the CRM. So I've actually got a spreadsheet that I've named Cleanup here that has just a few of the common things that I'll see when importing data in for clients. So some of the more common things are going to be, let's actually just do this. Close enough. There we go. Okay, so first off, I'm going to talk about column G, price. So when you're importing in numeric values like this into the CRM, each of the fields that you're importing into has a data type. So these records are actually properties here. So this price column is going to ultimately go into this one here, transaction price. Transaction price is, when we go to right-click on the field and go to Properties, we can see information about that field. And the data type is integer, int. So that means that it can only take numeric values, and that's specifically numeric values with no decimals. So whole numbers over 0. So the data type integer means that if you try to put a dollar sign into that field, it'll give you an error each time. So in this case, one of the most common things, and most of you should have an idea of how to do this, but if not, here's how. If you want to just remove the dollar signs from a field, it's as simple as highlighting the column, Control F to find and replace, and you want to click on the Replace tab there. Select dollar sign and keep the replace with at nothing. No, actually, that should have worked because it's a CSV. I think Excel changed how it works with CSVs. So in this case, actually, the other method, and apparently the way that it'll actually work 100% of the time now, right-click, Format Cells, and choose Number, and you want to make sure to set the decimal places to 0. Because as I said, that is an integer field, so if you try to put decimals in there, it would also give an error. So hit OK, and it will strip the dollar sign from those values. The next that I see commonly that needs to be done is going to be splitting out one column into a few. So for example, we have column J here where we have the city, state, and zip code in one column. However, in the CRM, if we actually go to the contact information and double click on here, we'll see those are all separate fields in here. So we've got a zip code, a state, and a city all separated. So this is going to require us to use a function called text to columns, and we'll actually need to do it twice in this case. Well, actually no, we can probably do it with the text to columns and to find and replace. So in this case, we see that the city is always followed by a comma, and then a space, and then the state, and then a space, and then 5-digit zip code. Pretty common. We see this pretty regularly in our day-to-day lives, I'm sure. So if you highlight a column and go into the Data tab, you will see a button here called Text to Columns. And if you highlight over it, it'll show you what it does. Split a single column of text into multiple columns. Sounds like exactly what we want to do. We want to have one column for the city, one for the state, and one for the zip code. So when you click on that button, you'll first get two options, delimited or fixed width. So in this case, we're actually going to do delimited, although fixed width would work for the second part of this. So I'll actually do both. So first we're going to do delimited and hit next. And delimited means split by, or separated basically. And then your option of the delimiter. The delimiter in this case is a comma, so what separates these values? Of course, it could also be a space and a comma. And that means you could actually do it in one fell swoop like that. I'm actually going to ignore the space one though for right now, as in this case, if we have it in one column like that, we can use the delimited option as well. So we're going to split it by the comma, so it'll take the city in one and then the state and zip code in the next. Hit finish, and we see that's exactly what it ended up doing. Next, we want to split this one up into the city and zip code. Now, of course, if you were watching, you could have just done the comma and space simultaneously, but I wanted to show what the fixed width does. So text to columns again, while highlighting that column, and then if we select fixed width and hit next, it gives you a little line where you can select exactly where you want it to split up the column. So in this case, we can put like that, so it splits right at the space after the state. Hit finish, and Excel will also automatically get rid of the leading and trailing space for you. So at this point, we now want to rename our 3 columns. Actually, we want to and the reason I did that and made sure that each of them were called owner city, owner state, and owner zip code is because we actually, well, it wouldn't have made a difference in this one, but you can't have 2 columns that have the same exact header name, or the CRM on the import will get confused and not know exactly which one of the columns. Ultimately, it'll be the farthest on the left, but the easiest way to avoid that is to not have any columns that have the exact same name. So an easy way to make sure of that is to for the owner address information, preface them with owner. For the same thing for the tenant, same thing for anything like that. Okay, let's see. And then kind of the opposite is when you want to take 2 columns and put them into one. Now you can actually do that both in the in Excel, or you can actually do that, and I'll show you how to put 2 columns into one field in the CRM during the import process, but we can do that directly in Excel using a function called concatenate. So first off, I want to just insert a new column in here so I have a spot to put this. And I'm going to name this column zip plus 4. So first off, you put your cursor into the cell that you want to combine the two of. Actually, I probably should have put that on the other side. One sec. So put the cursor in here where you want to actually combine the two. So I want it to say 94541-4106. Hit the FX button, insert function, and then we're going to do concatenate. So because I've done it recently, it'll show up in here in my recent list. But if it doesn't, if you just type part of the name, like concat, and hit go, it'll give you an option for concatenate. So once you hit that, you'll see this window where you have what are called function arguments. First off, we have text 1. What do we want to be the first piece of text? Well, that's going to be the zip code in column D, and we want to make sure it's on the same row. So click on D2 here, and then next we want the next piece of text. For that, we actually want just a dash. So in there, I'm just going to type on my keyboard a dash, and then click in text 3, and here we're going to click on E2. And we can see down here on the bottom right, it kind of gives us a running example of exactly what it's going to look like. When we hit OK, we then see that it put the zip code and then a dash and then the 4 numeric identifier at the end. Now we can then just double click at the bottom right of that cell to copy it down all the way for all of those items. So those are pretty much the main things that I see on a regular basis with Excel. There's a few things I have to do that require third-party tools and Visual Basic scripting, but that I'd say probably goes outside the realm of an import webinar, as I sincerely doubt anyone would want to watch me typing code for 30 minutes. Although if you have any desire for that, let me know and we'll see what we can work out for a future webinar. So now we're going to go ahead and start doing some imports of this information into the CRM. So I'm just going to go ahead and save the spreadsheet. I'm not sure that we'll need to use it for right now, but we're going to be working with 2 different spreadsheets to import into the database now. So I've got one for sales comparables and one for spaces. So I'm just going to open up each of these kind of to show you what each of the spreadsheets should look like prior to importing this type of information. One second here. So first off right here, I've got the sale comp spreadsheet. And we see, there we go. Okay. So starting from the left, we've got the property information, the name, the address, the city, the state, the zip code, when it was sold and how much. So this is information that's going to be both for the sale comparable and for the property itself. Then starting here at column L, we've got information for the buyer, the company name of the buyer, the first and last name and address. And if we keep scrolling over, we'll see we also have information for a listing agent, as well as a procuring agent, as well as a seller. So as you can see, it's a lot more complicated than a basic property import, which would just have a fraction of this information. It would have the property information, and it would have the buyer information as the owner. And the sales comps import actually contains a full property import on it and then imports additional information into additional places. The seller, the listing agents going into the contacts, and the sale comp record going into sales comparables, linking back to all of the appropriate records. And these files and a map for each of these files as templates will also it's not up on the knowledge base article as of yet, but I began updating that to put these there. So both the space import template and the sale comparable import template are going to be available for download on our knowledge base, and we'll email out a link to that knowledge base article after the webinar to all of the people that signed up for this webinar. So it'll give you an easy place to kind of start from for spaces and sales comps as well. So all you'll need to do is take a spreadsheet and match up the columns to match the spreadsheet itself, and you can use the map and not have to get involved with the actual mapping process whatsoever. So taking a side step here, spaces. So spaces has a few less columns in this case, as it has a few less contacts, but In this case, it'll import multiple properties. So we see each one of these rows represents a space within a property, and we've got five spaces in one building and 3 spaces in another, each one with a separate tenant, contact, and company at each of them. So like scrolling through, you can see that we've got the property information, contact information, and company information to go into those appropriate spots, as well as space information, which includes the lease itself. So a few more places to match everything up, but really at its core, importing becomes more tedious than anything once you kind of get the hang of it. It can definitely be a bit non-intuitive from the get-go, but I think at the end of it, you'll probably just be more tired of dragging and dropping fields, or at least that's my hope, because that's the goal of these webinars. So I'm just going to go ahead and close out of these spreadsheets, and we'll start off by importing starting with the sales comps one. As the space one, I've already created a map for, so we can kind of skip ahead on that one. So as with any import, you'll want to go to File, Import, and File/Database. And for what kind of data you want to import, these are going to be your different options. Now, the ones that haven't been talked about yet or on this webinar are going to be units and lease comps, which I just don't see that many imports of them, although I just want to let you know that they are definitely available there, just it really isn't something that comes up very frequently. So in this case, we're going to select sales comps, and we're going to create a new import map, drop this down, and we're going to choose comma delimited file with header. We'll browse for that sales comps file that we just had, and hit next. So on the sale comp import, just like any import once again, on the left side you see the destination fields, on the right side the source fields, which are the fields from Excel. With sales comps, it's separated first into 2 tabs along the top, making it seem deceptively simple. However, when you click on the linked records tab, that's when you see where all the information actually ends up matching up to. Now, of course, how much information you have to match up and how much you need to actually import is entirely up to you. A lot of people, for example, don't necessarily require the procuring and listing agents, which gets rid of a lot of the duplicated information. But under the linked records, this is where you'll import a property record, and this is a full property import right here. So you've got the property record along with the site contact, owner, and agent. Then we've got the buyer, which is a contact with a company and a contact record, the seller, the procuring agent, and the listing agent. And then within each of these tabs is either a company or a contact. So this is an import where the same information gets matched up multiple times. For example, on the actual buyer, the buyer will end up once on the sale comp record itself on that tab, once on the linked records under property under owner, and again under buyer. So it's really something to be a little bit diligent about and have to kind of duplicate efforts, unfortunately, a little bit here. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the sale comp tab, and for the most part these should actually match up exactly, as these are just CRM fields. So start off with property name, drag and drop, and so as you see, it's pretty much the same as any other import, just we have to then start going and making sure that all of the appropriate linked records are matched up. So I'm actually going to only do part of the fields on here, as this will take a while, and I've got a saved one for it later anyway. Sale date and sale price. And there's actually a reason I wanted to at least get to there. So after that, I'm going to go ahead and just skip and go to the buyer information. So when you drop this down, you'll see as you scroll through, once you get past user fields, you'll see buyer information, listing agent, procuring agent, and seller information. So on here, I'm just going to go ahead and do some of the buyer information real quick. Buyer company, buyer first name, last name, address, and so on. So what I personally do when I'm doing a sales comps import to kind of keep it a little bit more in keep it organized rather. When I finish with the buyer information, well, technically when I finish with the property information, after each of the different sections on the sale comp tab, I want to go and update the appropriate linked records. So the first one I would do would actually be the property. So after I've gone there, I'd go into here, property record, linked records, and do property name, address, and the exact same fields that I just selected a moment ago. So 90% of the import itself is just going to be a lot of this selecting the field and then dragging and dropping into the expression box that's appropriate for it. And then, of course, as with any import, we want to make sure that we mark keys. So I'm actually going to come back to the sale comp to talk about keys on the comp, as they're a little bit more unique than the, well, there's no such thing as more unique. They're unique in the concept of importing, so I'll talk about that in a moment. But as I'm going through each of the linked records, I'll make sure that I'm going to match the fields that I want to check for duplicates on. So for the property, I'm just going to select the address, the city, the state, and the zip code. So each time it goes in and imports, it will check those fields to make sure that it's not duplicated. Let's see. I know in here I have an excuse to talk about the condition. Okay, so yeah, I'll talk about the condition in a moment then when we go back to the linked records. Okay, so then we went to buyer here, and then linked records. First off, I always like to go left to right just to kind of have a consistent method. So the buyer will actually show up first under the owner tab here. So I'm just going to go to the owner contact and start matching up the buyer information. So company. And you can see exactly why it's going to be very beneficial to just get a copy of this spreadsheet and import map, because, I mean, it would probably still take me a half an hour plus to match all of the fields in here appropriately, and I literally do this for a living. So it can be a little bit tedious doing this sort of task on a regular basis, so I highly suggest taking a look at that if you do need to import sales comparables into the database. So for the buyer information, I'm just going to match up the key on the first name, last name, address, and company. So if you notice, I'm actually matching up keys on every single one of these tabs. So these keys are going to be each separate on each of the individual tabs. So the tab, the owner tab here under key is going to be different than technically the buyer tab here. And then so when it does find a duplicate record when you're doing these imports based on the keys, that's where this update existing records comes in. And I did talk about that on the basic import, where you have a choice of the when blank or always. So when it finds a duplicate, this is what it ultimately does. And this is on a global scale per tab. So for example, if I choose update existing records when blank here, it doesn't have an effect, say, on the property tab here. Now, what you can also do is, while this is global to this tab, you can also have control on a field-by-field basis using this update column here. So this update column has those exact same options except for key only to do this on a one-field basis. So let's say for the zip code, we want it to update existing records when blank, but for the property name, we want the spreadsheet to always update. So we can do this, and this will always override what's on the update existing record selection. And then finally, something I rarely talk about, as it's not really utilized all that often, is the key only button. So key only. So the idea is when it finds a match, when blank is going to update existing records and fill in blank information. Always will fill in from the spreadsheet. Never will just ignore any updates and move along. Key only is actually very similar to never, and in 9 times out of 10 will actually functionally work the same as never, but is primarily used when, for example, you're importing sales comps, but you want it to just import sales comps in order to bring in linked records. So you can use key only on the sale comp, so it will never import any new records, even if there are new records. But for any of the records that already exist in the database, it'll go in and update the linked records appropriately, how it's set to update existing records here. So that allows you to just import appropriate linked records without having to import the base record, like sales comps you can use to import owners. More beneficial would be something like importing spaces in order to import tenants, but not necessarily importing the spaces in if they don't exist. Also, in that sense, it'll also only it'll skip anything that's not in your database, so you can kind of rest assured that you're only updating information and not adding anything, which sometimes can definitely be appropriate. So moving along here. And then finally, the only other option that I haven't really talked about yet is this delete records not in import file. So what that will do is it will actually replace your database, your CRM database, with a copy of what's in this spreadsheet and nothing else. You also have to utilize record deletion keys with import key fields defined with import expressions. So you have to actually use this condition functionality, and it's generally never going to be used, and it would probably still be a better idea to just manually delete the records. So I would probably just say that's more or less a developer option, as I've never really had to utilize it myself in like 12 years of this import being around. So just to give an idea. So going back to the property, or to the import, we would then go and update the property owner and then the buyer tab as well. Next up, we would then go and update the listing agent and so on accordingly. So it really is going to be just a bunch of that, so I'm going to kind of skim over that. We'll talk about the spaces import in a moment, but I do want to talk about keying for sales comps. So again, when you check keys on a record, that means every time a row from your spreadsheet database, it's going to check each of these to see if a record already exists. So in this case, we have it checked for property name, address, city, and state. So each time it imports a row, it'll check the information in the spreadsheet, see if the data already exists in the database, which means either already existed before the import or earlier in the import. So if one record's in an import twice, it won't duplicate that record from the import either. And so as long as all four of these fields are identical, and that means 100% identical, then it will, instead of creating a new record, that's when it will utilize the update existing records here. So with sales comparables, sometimes you actually want duplicated properties. So the only real difference that I'll usually do is I'll also include fields like sale date and sale price. So that way for each property, you can have multiple sales for a property, but you're probably not going to have multiple sales on the same day of the same price. If those 6 fields are identical, it's almost certainly going to be a duplicate. And that's just a really good example of how the keys can really differ based on what your information itself is and what your end goal is. So while this would work fantastically for properties, not necessarily for sales comps in that case. Just 1 second here. I'm going to put it on mute and clear my throat for a second. It's getting a little bad here. I absolutely love springtime. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about the expression editor. I talked about how you can combine 2 columns into 1 field in the in Excel using concatenate, but you can actually do that exact same functionality using this expression. So in this case, I'm going to actually put the first name and last name together for the owner into the full name column. Probably not something you'll ever need to do, but there are valid reasons to do this. It's just I don't have a spreadsheet that will really allow for it. So I've got my name column, and rather than dragging and dropping a field into the expression box, instead I'm going to put my cursor into that box and click on the button with the 3 dots here. And if you notice, this is the same expression editor that we just used to add a unique ID to each of our records using functions miscellaneous new ID. And you can actually do that directly from the importer too. It's the exact same window with the exact same functionality. So if we also see on the left side, first off, it's separated into 3 sections: operators, functions, and fields. Fields will be all of the different columns in your Excel spreadsheet. So if you actually just kind of go through and look at these, you can kind of get an idea of what you can do with it. The one that we're going to use is the and% here. And if you notice, it's also called concatenate in here as well, something fairly commonly used jargon-wise. And then We'll show off a few of the more commonly used functions in here. I mean, even still, most people don't end up using more than maybe a couple of expressions ever on importing. So I don't want to spend a great deal of time, but it's definitely worth knowing kind of what can be done. And if you ever need that, like, you can always shoot us an email and we can help you with an expression that would, do exactly what you need to do. But in this case, we're going to do what I consider to be probably one of the most simple expressions, and that's putting two columns into one field. So in this case, we wanted to put the first name of the buyer and the last name of the buyer in. So when your cursor is here on the top right, and you double click on one of the fields in the list, it will just copy that field name into there and put it into brackets. If you hit test, you'll see it's just going to show you exactly what that field is. So when you drag and drop a field into the expression box there, this is actually exactly what happens. It looks like this. But you can also, with the expression editor, use the ampersand sign, to put multiple things together. So now we have the buyer first name, and then an and then we can do the buyer last name. When we hit test, we're going to see it doesn't really look all that great because it's not going to have a space between the first name and last name yet. But we'll get there. So what we can do is actually have one more ampersand, and then between the two, we can just put a space within quotation marks. So looking at it from left to right, first off, we've got the first field that we want to go in there, and then each unique string is separated by an ampersand. And then in this case, this is going to give us a space. So you can put quotation marks around whatever you want. So, I mean, for example, if we wanted to put whatever we want, we could put that within the quotation marks. And when we hit test, we're going to show Terry whatever we want, Galvin Project Manager. So if we make that look a little bit better with just a space, we'll see it actually comes out correct that way. So that's probably the most common use of the expression editor, is that right there. But one other thing was on prices. So I'd also talked about changing the format of a column in Excel. But if you have 50, like let's say you're importing 50 different spreadsheets, it can be a lot easier to do that at the import level rather than modifying 50 different spreadsheets prior to import. Now, I'm not condoning importing 50 spreadsheets. Please don't ever do that unless you have a very good reason to, but it could potentially happen, and there's definitely times, I mean, even with 3 spreadsheets, I'd rather do it on the import map. So if we want to just, for example, not have the $ show up, we want to replace the $ with nothing, we can do that through the expression editor. So we've already got the sale price field mapped here. So if we click on the button with 3 dots, we'll see exactly that, just that field in brackets there. So we're going to be using a function under string called replace. So when you have an item highlighted like that and you double click on one of the items over here, it'll actually put that within the actual parentheses of the expression itself. And if you hover over the actual expression name on the left side under the strings, it'll actually show you what it's doing. So in this case, it's replace S, P, R, and then it says afterwards, replace instances of P in S with R. So S is first, that's your field. P is the value that you want to find and replace. R is the value that we want to replace with. So you first have the field, and then you have a comma, and then within quotation marks, you put the value that you want it to find. So in this case, a $, and then a comma, and then what you want it to put in there within quotation marks. In this case, nothing. So what this is saying is within the sale price field, find any $, and replace it with what's in these quotation marks. If we hit test there, well, we don't have $signs in our data, but that's how it would end up looking as well. So those are the 2 most common reasons to use the expression editor. I'm not going to really delve into it further, as beyond that, it's going to be like maybe a couple people would need any given specific thing. So it's going to really kind of, it's more about knowing that it's there and kind of looking and seeing what your options are, and then we can definitely help with the specifics on it, but the specifics are really going to be person to person. But one other thing on outside of the norm of just dragging and dropping fields on the import is you can actually utilize the expressions with directly putting information in there that's not necessarily in Excel. So, for example, let's say for all of our records, we didn't have a state in Excel, but we wanted to fill in the state in our database. We can put our cursor into the field here and for the field choose state, but we don't have a field on the right side to actually select and drag and drop. Well, utilizing the trick with the quotation marks, anything within quotation marks is actually going to automatically go into that field. So what this will do is for every single one of the 11 sale comps that are going to be imported, it'll put California in for the state on all of them. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the spaces import, and that one I actually have a pre-made map for, and there's a couple things that are going to be a little bit different on that one as well. And again, the maps that are used for those each of these spreadsheet files is going to be available, as well as the spreadsheets themselves, the sample templates on knowledge base article on our knowledge base. Wow, I was trying to think of another word for it, so I didn't say knowledge base twice in the same sentence. So this one's already all kind of separated, and we see it's a little bit different than the sale comp import that we just saw. So first off, it's separated into 3 different primary tabs. The space, which is where you'll have the actual information for the physical space itself, and the lease information, so the suite, the lease expiration, and the square footage. The property, which is, once again, a fully self-contained property import. In this case, we've got a property as well as owner information, although I'll be honest, usually when people are importing spaces in, you're not going to see the property owners on the spreadsheets nearly as often as not having them. But then there's also an additional tab for the tenant, whether that's a tenant company or a tenant contact. And so a few kind of unique things about how this works. So one thing about spaces is they can be very, very difficult to key, as when you think about it, when it imports each row and it checks the suite, it's going to have, you're very likely to have, 3 or 4 copies of, or not copies, but 3 or 4 spaces in suite 100, but in different properties. So one thing that's unique about the space import is when you mark key here, you're effectively marking key on the suite, but also within the property itself. So each time it imports a space, it's going to check the suite, but it'll also check the property information to link to the correct property. So this is only going to come in if you have 3 Suite 100s at the same building. And in fact, in our sample spreadsheet that we're working with here, you can see that we actually have multiple Suite 100s, multiple Suite 200s, and so on. So for example, yeah, I think we got a couple of Suite 201s. So it's somewhat unique in that the primary tab also usually doesn't get most of the information. So most of the information ends up being linked to the property and the tenant side, and the space is more or less kind of the link between the two of them. So most of the work here is going to be on the property tab itself, where you can have the actual physical building information and the tenant information. And in addition to this is another import where you're often going to have to duplicate your efforts a little bit. So we have the suite, lease expiration, and square footage, but then also on the tenant side, we'll want to put that on the tenant information as well. Well, one thing I want to do is I want to make sure that since these contacts are tenants, I check tenant for all of them as well. So we don't actually have a column in our spreadsheet that'll do that, but again, we can use the expression box to do that for us by simply putting in the word true in all caps, and let's see, perfect, within quotation marks. So whenever you have a checkbox field and you do that as the expression, for each and every single one of the records that gets imported, it will check that checkbox for you. Then we can also go here and match the tenant information as well. So like space dot suite. Okay, so once you've matched all your fields, that's pretty much ready to go now on this point. So finally, I want to talk a couple about the options on this screen that I don't really delve into too much, and that's going to be this Create History Records option. So that's gives you two different options here, either create a history record when creating a new record or when updating an existing record. So these can be an easy way to find records that were updated by an import or find brand new records that were added by a specific import, because what it'll do is it'll add a history record to each of those different records that either get imported or updated. And then from the dashboard, you can find that history record and look up the linked records to easily and quickly find those updated records that way. So it's basically another way to kind of group records, but groups can only place new records into a group and doesn't actually put existing records into an existing group ever. So if there are any questions, I haven't seen any come in as of yet, but by all means ask away at this point, as I kind of, well, basically take time for questions now. So we'll actually be talking about importing again in the very near future as well. It's something that's talked about very frequently. We'll have some new functionality here in the next week or so being added to the online CRM for importing as well. So that's one to definitely look out for, is generally when we come out with those new functionalities and new features or update the ones that we have, we like to show you how to use the new functionality. And especially with the online importing, I feel like that's a really good way to do 90% of imports. And for spaces and sales comps and things that require a little bit more in-depth, you can still utilize the desktop importer for those. And really it's a matter of just multiple different tools for different occasions. But I'm not seeing any questions come in, so if you do run into any snags along the way, by all means, there's a question, do you have any import maps already set up for multifamily? Not specifically for unit mix breakdowns, and the reason for that is multifamily unit mixes have to be set up in a unique way where you'll end up with one row for each different unit mix type. So for example, if you have a property at, let's say, 1000 Main Street with 5 different unit types, you would have 5 rows for that actual property. You'd have one for the 1 bedroom, 1 bath, one for the 2 bedroom, 1 bath, one for 2 and 2, and so on. And so you would need 5 rows for that property, and then, like, let's say 5 for the next property that also has 5 unit type mixes. So unfortunately, it's just not something that's come up too often, and I haven't had one in about 4 years. So at this point, I've just kind of lost track of where that file ended up going. All right, and there was a question, how do you set this up with the categories? I'm not sure what you mean by which categories. So if you could clarify that, what you mean by categories. All right, it honestly, so like I would have to do a whole new webinar on this topic exactly, and I would probably need to bring up a spreadsheet to reference. So Scott, if I could actually have you just shoot an email to support@realnex.com and just kind of ask about setting up a unit, multifamily unit import. I'll actually see, I should have a copy of a spreadsheet somewhere. I'll see if I can find, because it is unique, but it actually is set up in that unique way. So that way I have well, actually, I don't need you to shoot an email. I should be able to get that from Sarah. So Sarah, give me his email after this, and I'll get you taken care of, Scott. But I didn't see any other questions come in, so thank you all for joining me today, and we'll be doing a webinar each Tuesday and Thursday, with the exception of, I believe, next week we will not have Thursday, but look forward to seeing all of you at our upcoming webinars here in the near future as well. So Sarah, if you have anything else?
Yeah, I just want to encourage everybody to regularly visit the webinar page. There's a button directly on our homepage, and we are updating and adding new webinars there all the time. So check in and sign up. And that's it. Everybody have a great afternoon.